We're bringing in Joe Marino, the Locked On Bills podcast. We moved him off of yesterday. We got him for you today, Jeremy and Joe. But Joe DiBiase is off today. Nate Geary is in, and Joe Marino is on the Western Hotline. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, guys. Hope you're doing well.
We are doing well, right? I mean, it's a big week for the Bills and the Patriots, and our producer Joe Cali has found that NBC Boston has discussed this game, and in traditional NBC Sports Boston honk fashion, they have predicted that if the Bills lose this game, they need to clean house for Mike Tomlin. In potentially the worst take of all time. So we are going to get that. Joe Kelly said, you want me to play it now? I said, no, it will derail everything we're going to do here. But, a reminder that people in Boston are nuts. Anyway, Joe, the Bills are trying to avenge a loss from earlier in the season. And my favorite thing to think about for this game is, like, what will be different this time around? Not in result, but in process, right? Like, what is different about the Bills from week 4 or 5? It was week 5. And what's different about the Patriots since week 5? So let's start with the Bills in terms of what you think is different about them that New England will have to adjust to with how the Bills operate, 3 months later.
Well, I think the biggest thing is defensively. I think the Bills are a lot different team than the one they were in week 5. And we had talked a lot in the preseason about how the first stretch of the year is going to be tough for the defense with a lot of new pieces kind of coming together and, pieces not being available. And obviously the personnel hasn't quite been able to stabilize. But going back to that game, I mean, the Bills at defensive tackle, it was Fedarian Mathis having to play for the first time and Zion Logue at defensive tackle. It's still Taylor Rapp in the lineup. And we know the shift, right, that has happened with Poyer stepping in and how things have really stabilized on the back end. It's before McDermott's involvement in play calling defensively. Matt Milano popped his pec in that game. There was like a lot of things that weren't ideal, and I think will be different this time. I think the Bills obviously have things they have to overcome defensively in every single game, but I think that they're in a lot better position defensively just with how more connected they are with their overall scheme. They're playing cover 3 better. They're playing more man. They're using their back 7 depth to play matchups better. And so I think this team from a defensive perspective is a lot different than the one we watched in week 5. And, I think there's been some elements of the offense as well that have shifted quite a bit. Obviously the landscape of the receiver room is different. And that's going back to a time where Keon Coleman was your guy playing the most snaps. Well, now he's the receiver that plays the least amount of snaps. And so I think that's improved things. And I think this team is a lot more aware of who they are at this point in the season than they were back in week 5.
Yeah, Joe, I actually wanted to ask you, too, a little bit about the second half last week against the Bengals and the shift defensively and which version of the Bills defensively you'd like to see maybe moving forward, because they went from frankly, it was very reminiscent to me of the 2022 playoff game where they played soft coverage in the first half, really had no answers for the Bengals pass game, and they switched in the second half. And like traditionally, I think most Bills fans would all agree, like, okay, well, you don't really blitz Joe Burrow. He'll kill you against the blitz. But I thought it sped Joe Burrow's processing up. He made some bad throws, and ultimately I think it led to the 2 big turnovers. So, like, when you look at that second half, do you just look at it and say, it felt like Sean McDermott had his fingerprints on that second half play calling? And what version of this defense, the sit back, rush 4, and try to make plays and get to the quarterback with 4, or start blitzing a little bit more and creating pressure? I mean, they blitzed Christian Benford a whole bunch in that second half.
Yeah, the big shift with the Bills against the Bengals in the second half is the blitz rate. They blitzed 16% in the first half against Cincy, went up to 44% in the second half. And I'd agree with you, Nate. It's not like they were blitzing and giving free runners and, harassing Joe Burrow. That didn't happen. But it did speed up his process. It did, especially in the snow with his foot, right? I mean, he's still playing with a weird shoe and adjusting to life with that. And so when you force him to speed up his process and find platforms quicker than he wants to, it affects his accuracy. And I think the ball got away from him a little bit. And also the snow, like I was watching with Jerry Ostrowski last night, we went through all of Joe Burrow's dropbacks where he held on to the ball for more than 2.5 seconds. So we were assessing the pass rush together, and the Bills' defensive line just couldn't get their footing. Greg Rousseau is trying to rush on his tippy toes to keep his feet in the ground somehow. And I think that necessitated some blitz, or else Joe Burrow is just going to throw accurate footballs and kill you. So they did make the good adjustment. Now, I think you have to play Drake Maye differently than Joe Burrow, who I think just has a little bit more physical upside and obviously is more settled into this season than Joe Burrow. I thought the Bills did a very good job in Week 5 of defending him as a scrambler. I think he has 3 scrambles for 12 yards, and for the season, I think Drake Maye's got the second or third most scramble yards this year. But what killed him was he was able to roll to his right and make a ton of plays. Thinking about that game-winning drive, right, to rolling to his right, getting that crazy pass off, and that really got him started, and they eventually win the game with the field goal. I think you got to get back into your spy mirror stuff on third downs. And the Bills have broken this out against some mobile quarterbacks. You've seen it against Mahomes. You saw it against Baker Mayfield situationally. And what they do is they'll rush 3 with a spy mirror linebacker over top. And the advantage here is that the spy player gives the front freedom to rush and be creative with how they want to attack the pocket. And they knowing that they have the cleanup player over top. And so I think you have to get that going situationally and try to affect Drake Maye, because he's obviously having a great year and he can do a lot of damage in a lot of different ways. But how do you keep him from rolling to his right and making the plays that he did in Week 5? I think that's the big task ahead for McDermott and Babbage.
Last time they played, Drake Maye threw the ball to Stephon Diggs 12 times, and the next most targeted receiver, Kayshon Boutte, had 3, Hunter Henry had 4. In terms of how they're going to defend these weapons, Joe, do you have an idea of how they might do it? Like Christian Benford, he doesn't go to the slot that much. I don't feel like he's going to go on Diggs. Is Benford on Kayshon Boutte, and like you're going to take your chances with Taron Johnson covering Stephon Diggs? Like you got Max Hairston, who you did not have in the first matchup. They've got their options, of course. I just don't think it'll be the same kind of 12 targets for Diggs game plan, even from New England.
Probably not, but I mean, I don't think anyone has a whole lot of confidence in Taron Johnson being able to get the job done one-on-one with Diggs in the slot. And like you said, it's not like Christian Benford moves into the slot. And so I am fascinated to find out, because that's kind of the matchup that you're concerned about, partly because you know that the Patriots are going to want to spam that a little bit, but also that this has kind of been an issue. And Taron Johnson's not been good in coverage this year. He's not been good against the run either, and this is an issue. And how do you overcome that? Well, I guess you would say, well, put a different player on him. Well, okay, these are players that aren't repped in those spots. The spacing is different. It's difficult. And so that's a tough one for them to figure out. But I do have great concern about Taron Johnson or Cam Lewis on Diggs in the slot and the challenges that create for the Bills defense. I like the rest of the matchups.
Yeah.
But how they deal with that one is going to be a big question mark.
And one reason that might be such a key matchup, like, Joe, we didn't see – I mean, it's funny. Like, Maye has this thing going on, Drake Maye, where I think he's one of the best deep ball thrower in the league. Like, he's a very, very good downfield deep ball thrower. And yet he doesn't have a 300-yard game. They haven't had too many scripts where he's had to do that. And I think about all the times that I've watched the Bills play elite quarterbacks and whatever, how the Bills like to play. They don't often give up too much stuff down the field. They don't get beat over the top. So do you feel like they'll lean into preventing that, because that's the thing that Maye can really kill a defense with? If you give him an ounce of an ability to shoot down the field, he's going to take it. And he's hit Kayshon Boutte and Pop Douglas. And like with all that vertical passing game, like that's where the Hunter Henry and Steph Diggs, that's where they eat in this kind of game.
Yeah, you're right. The Bills do like to eliminate, the down the field throws. It's always a high priority for them. The challenge is that can come at the expense of, some of your underneath stuff. And I think that for as good as Drake Maye has been throwing the ball down the field, I think he's number 1 in EPA by like 0.2. It's pretty significant on deep throws. He's not a guy that's not capable of working the short stuff and keeping the offense on schedule and making those throws. And so whatever idea the Bills have, they just can't leave a ton of air out there, right? They got to take the air out of it. That was kind of the issue early against Cincinnati. You just gave too much cushion. And here's the thing about the Patriots. Like, for as good as Drake Maye has been throwing the ball down the field, they don't really have, like, dynamic athletes at the wide receiver position. I think, Pop Douglas is certainly their most explosive player, but, Hollins, Diggs, Butte, these are not guys that are athletic mismatches. And so, I wouldn't be afraid to lean into some cover two, two-man coverage, cover one, those types of things to play some man. I think you can hang up, obviously, with Harrison. Benford certainly can. Trey White, the Trey White is the number one corner since week 6 and fewest catches allowed per coverage snap, and number 2 is Christian Benford. Like, holy crap, that's a real stat. And so I think you can live with that a little bit. And what I can't do the death by a million paper cuts. That's where I struggle with it. And so, whatever, you give up a play down the field, we saw it. The Bills gave up plays down the field against Joe Burrow, to T. Higgins a couple times, and Gesicki, whatever. Like, live with that as opposed to the, oh my God, they're going to go 8 of 8 on third down on the first 2 drives and there's no resistance and you just hope they make a mistake. I think you got to force it a little bit, and that's what improved in the second half, and I think you got to replicate some of that against Drake Maye.
One thing that's different for New England, they've got a lot of accusations about things being inflated, and I feel like the latest thing is their defense is not nearly as good as maybe it looked earlier in the season. Now, there's some explanations for that, injuries or quality of opponent. But since losing Milton Williams, it's a team that gives up a lot on the ground after being one of the better run defenses in football. And, like, to me, any Bills fan that hears this team gives up 130 on the ground per game without Milton Williams is going to think, like, all right, it's a James Cook kind of game.
Yeah, it should be. The Patriots over their last 4 games have allowed a 69% success rate on zone runs and 6 yards per carry. Those are dead last in the NFL. And on all runs, they have the lowest stuff rate defensively against the run in the NFL over the last 4 games. They've had some challenges, like you mentioned, Milton Williams, Crisis Tonga has missed some time recently. And so, the Bills have got to have a healthy amount of James Cook as part of this plan. Now, I do think that back in week 5, the Patriots did the best job of any team and defending James Cook in his traditional run schemes. I know that Josh Allen had some scrambles, so the Bills had a decent amount of rushing yards, but it wasn't James Cook. And that's because of what they can do with their corners. They got Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez. They're both 6'2", 200 pounds, 33-inch arms, and love to tackle. And they did a really good job of inserting them into the run fits and slow playing and taking away spill and cutback opportunities. And I'm really curious to see how the Bills adjust from that. And obviously, I think both teams are a little bit different now than they were 10 weeks ago. But it does need to be a James Cook game. He needs to not fumble because that was part of the issue. Like, go back to week 5, and the Bills turned it over 3 times, and they were horrible turnovers. I mean, once Josh gave him the ball at, like, the 9-yard line, like the Patriots' 9-yard line. The Dawson Knox fumble. They fumbled on Keon Coleman. Those are the first 2 drives. The Knox fumble and Keon Coleman fumble. They had 11 penalties for 90 yards and lost by 3. It's just like, don't beat yourself. Lean into your run game. And, I think the Bills will have a good shot at going in there and avoiding this being the week that the Patriots clinch the division. And,
like, when you look at this Patriots offense, Joe, part of what I look at is, especially if you start going back to the close games they've played, I think of, their win against Cincinnati. They win by 6. They beat Tampa barely. A lot of, and that, especially I look back at that Tampa game because, it's easy to compare opponents here with the Bills, is their success rate on offense was really low against Tampa Bay. They had 3 big plays in that game. I look at New England's offense, and right now they are 4th in explosive play rate in the run game and 3rd in explosive rate in pass game. It feels like an offense that can be, I'm not saying at all times, but can be very boom or bust. And for you, when you think about that, does that play into the Bills' hands a little bit? I know we were talking about one of the keys to this defense is they don't like to give up those big plays and those explosive plays. But this does feel like an offense that is maybe not over-reliant, but certainly reliant on big plays, helping them separate in games.
For sure. And to their credit, Nate, they make them, right? I mean,
right.
That's the thing about the Patriots. I know that nobody wants to give them any credit. I get it, right? We're all over the Patriots. We're disappointed that they're back in it and they have a good young quarterback and a great coach, and it sucks, right? Nobody wants it. But they've had chances to blow games, right? Multiple. And they don't. And they do make the big explosive plays. And so until they can't do that, right, that's their recipe. It's just like the Bills with turnovers on defense. Like, well, is this sustainable? Well, until it isn't, wake me up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get the big takeaways. They've been doing it for years. And so that's the thing about New England. And if you want to buy into that being true, that they're big play dependent and that's not sustainable, you should get excited about how bad they are in the red zone. They're 32nd in red zone defense. They're 24th in red zone offense. Obviously, that you're coming out of the bye. I'm sure that was the big point of emphasis, is how they get better in the red zone. And I'm curious to see what wrinkles there are. But when you are relying on explosive plays and you're not good at finishing drives, on either side of the ball, then that's a problem. And so for the Bills in this game, I think you hope that that's true. You hope that they can't get the explosive plays, and you're pretty good at limiting them, especially against the run lately, and that they're not good at finishing drives. And you need that to continue this week for New England, and whenever that wakes up, it needs to be in the future.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast joining us here on the Western Hotline for Bills-Patriots, the rematch. It's a juicy one, Sunday, 1 o'clock. Joe, thanks for the time. We'll chat next week.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Joe Marino. Find everything he does at thejoemarino.com. He's got comprehensive Bills coverage for you, and we are always honored to have him on. Usually Wednesdays. Had him on today.